Hello my friends, I've been using Fujifilm X-T4 for a couple of months now, which means that it is a time for my long-term review. X-T4 was released very shortly after the X-T3 with clear intention to complete the whole X-T package. After the initial testing, I liked the X-T4 a lot. Since then, I've used the X-T4 in many different situations and with various interesting lenses. Fujifilm has also released a couple of firmware updates and fixed some of the issues. In this video, I would like to share my long-term experiences with the X-T4 and maybe help you decide whether you should get one. Fujifilm's X-T line is, in my opinion, basically supposed to bridge the gap between Fujifilm's heritage rangefinder style cameras and purely pragmatic DSLM cameras from other manufacturers. What I was hoping to get from the X-T4 was the right amount of vintage feel and styling, combined with the latest technology. The styling is, in my opinion, great. I have always liked Fujifilm's vintage style cameras, and X-T4 is no exception. The only thing that doesn't match the vintage styling is the rotating screen. As long as it is closed, it is not a problem though. Overall, I think that the styling and technology are well balanced in the X-T4, but we will get to that later. The build quality is very good overall. I still think that the rotating mechanism and doors on the left side are two weak spots when it comes to build quality. Regarding the output that I have been getting from the X-T4, I am generally very happy and there isn't really anything new that I can add. X-Trans 4 sensor is, in my opinion, still the best crop sensor. Thanks to the latest technology such as backside illumination and fast readout, it is great for both stills and video. Especially the dynamic range is very impressive. If you keep the ISO low, the dynamic range is actually not that far from full-frame sensors. On the other hand, it is a big step up over Micro Four Thirds sensor, especially in high dynamic range scenes. 26 megapixels is a very nice resolution for all-round use. I'm still getting some questions about X-Trans 4 RAW developing. If you use any major updated RAW developing software such as Lightroom, Capture One or Luminar, there are no issues with artifacts or anything out of order. The low light performance is also very solid on this sensor. The images are very clean up to ISO 3200, and even 6400 is usable in most situations. As I've explained in my original review, there is a shift in ISO in comparison with Sony because they use different ISO scales. Autofocus is one of the areas where we have seen some changes. Fujifilm has improved autofocus in firmware 1.02, despite that it was not mentioned in the changelog. The speed and accuracy has never been an issue with the X-T4. The autofocus acquisition is extremely fast. Fujifilm claims 0.02 seconds, which is the same as the latest Sony cameras. In usual situations, it is also 100% accurate, and I haven't had any issues with that. Since firmware 1.02, I also haven't had any issues with hunting in stills mode. The eye tracking is also available, of course. The green square on the screen can't always keep up with the movement, but in my testing, it was able to track my face when walking towards the camera. It is definitely not as crazy fast and reliable as Sony though. For fast tracking and sports, Sony is definitely still ahead, but Fujifilm is definitely going in the right direction. For usual situations, it already works very well. In video mode, the speed and accuracy is also not an issue. The only issue may be the smoothness. Here it still depends a lot on the lenses. In the majority of my testing, I haven't had any issues with smoothness. With most of the lenses that I have tested, it can even do this very difficult close distance to infinity transition with no hunting. What may happen sometimes is that the autofocus will kind of pause in the middle of the transition. Fortunately, that only happens in difficult situations. Eye tracking in video is actually surprisingly good if you move at reasonable pace. My biggest complaint about the video autofocus are still the area modes. You can only choose from two area settings. wide or multi, and single point with adjustable size. There is no touch tracking or custom area setting. I hope that this will be added by firmware update. In-body image stabilization has also been improved. By the time that I bought the X-T4, the main issues were already fixed, so I haven't experienced any specific problems. The in-body image stabilization is generally very good. It is rated for 5.5 stops on its own. I was actually surprised how well it performed with a non-stabilized 50mm f1.0 lens. Even at that focal length, it is still good enough for static shots. At wider focal lengths, it is more than sufficient for panning or holding the camera still. In-body image stabilization can work with optical image stabilization in the lens. For example, with 16-80 or 16-55, it provides claimed 6.5 stops of in-body image stabilization. Hybrid stabilization works great, it is very effective even at 80mm, so Fujifilm was able to get that right. There is also additional digital stabilization, which is almost a tripod mode. I think that the body size to sensor size to stabilization efficiency ratio is very good with the X-T4. Overall, I have no complaints about the stabilization. Regarding the handling, as I have said in the beginning of the video, the X-T series is kind of supposed to be a compromise between engagement and ergonomy combined with ease of use. I can say that I was able to get used to the handling. I actually use ISO and shutter speed dials a lot, especially for video. If you want the fastest way to change exposure settings, you can set the dials to command and use the front and rear dial. In that case, it works like any other camera. Another thing that I got used to is the stills and video switch. That gives you completely separate settings for stills and video. I use very different settings for both, including exposure and film simulation settings. This dial is extremely convenient and fast on the go. My only major complaint is still the focus mode switch, which should have been on the backside in my opinion. Regarding the grip, it is larger than on the X-T3, and again a compromise between elegant shape and usability. When I was testing 50mm f1.0 on X-T4, it was on the edge, but I was still able to manage that combination without a battery grip. 16-55mm f2.8 is in my opinion completely fine on the X-T4. It is not the most comfortable grip in the world, but I can certainly live with it. I have also been using the X-T4 a lot with this new small rig cage, which also improves the grip. This is one of my most favorite small rig cages ever, so I will tell you more about that in upcoming X-T4 Cine rig video. The user interface is a bit old school, but I was able to get used to that. The menu is pretty well structured, but there is a ton of settings, so it requires some studying. Quick menu is great though. Unlike the main menu, it can be used with a touchscreen, so I use it for most settings. Regarding the video, the first thing that I will mention is the automatic exposure smoothness. That used to be a problem with Fuji cameras for a long time. Fortunately, Fujifilm improved the smoothness probably by 90% in firmware 1.03. Now it will be completely smooth in majority of situations. The video capabilities of Fujifilm X-T4 are great overall. It shoots 4K up to 60p in 10-bit 420 internally and 422 externally. Up to 30p, the 4K video is downsampled from the whole sensor. In 50 and 60p, there is a 1.18 times crop. You can also choose bitrate up to 400 megabits per second in all intra or 200 megabits per second long GOP. My most favorite combination is 4K 10-bit 420, 200 megabits per second, and Eterna film simulation. That is an excellent combination for me. It provides sufficient dynamic range and color information for editing, but at the same time it is easy to expose and relatively forgiving. I have had great results with these settings, and it is my most favorite color setting together with my custom PP8 on Sony, which is kind of similar. I've tried the F-Log as well and it is actually really good. Combined with the 10-bit footage, it captures enough data to extract color information from that flat footage. I also found it to be easier to expose in comparison with the V-Log L. One thing that still needs to be fixed though is the zooming in video. That is not smooth on X-T4 because of the lens correction adjustments, which are visible in video. Smooth zoom-in is only possible with MKX Cine lenses. I've also been getting a lot of questions about overheating. Personally, I have never had any issues with overheating on X-T4. It got very slightly warm a couple of times in summer, but that's all. Having said that, I don't shoot long clips and I bought this camera with my own money, so I haven't done any stress tests and I have no intention to do so in the future. A bit controversial point with the X-T4 is the rotating screen. Vlogging, streaming and all of that stuff grows extremely fast, and these users just want a rotating screen. It is understandable that Fujifilm needs to make a camera with a rotating screen, but the X-T line was a wrong choice for that in my opinion. There's just a big mismatch between the vintage styling with analog controls and camcorder style screen. The panel itself is very good though. It is a 3-inch panel with 1.62 million dots, it is sharp, color accurate, and bright enough for outdoors use. The viewfinder is also very good. It uses a 3.68 million dot panel with 0.75 times magnification, which is adequate for this price range. X-T4 also uses a new NPW325 battery with 2200 mAh capacity. In practical use, I was able to get through a whole day of typical travel shooting on one battery, so I am happy with the battery life. X-T4 supports pretty fast in-body USB-C charging, which is quite useful. I also have a prototype of the perfect USB-C charger for these batteries, but unfortunately I am not allowed to show that yet. As I mentioned, I've also tested a lot of lenses on the X-T4. Let's start with the most interesting one, which is 50mm f1.0. This lens basically provides proper full-frame results with APS-C system. Optically, it is the best lens for crop sensor that I have ever tested. The image quality is great right from f1.0. The rendition of bokeh is also beautiful. The size and the price is basically on par with first-party full-frame equivalents. I think that this lens is a great addition to the system and it gives portrait shooters more options that were not available with X-mount until now. The second interesting lens that I have tested is Viltrox AF 23mm f1.4. Optically it is also a very decent lens. It is very sharp in the center of the frame right from f1.4. If you stop it down to about f5.6, it is also very sharp in the corners. Lower corner sharpness at f1.4 is a compromise to achieve very small size. f1.4 also makes it suitable for blurring the background. A huge surprise with this lens is autofocus in video. This is actually one of the best focusing lenses that I've tested on X-T4. It can make basically any kind of transition without hunting. The build quality of this lens is also great and it actually feels very premium. It is also very budget friendly and all things considered, it might be my most favorite 23mm X-mount lens. I have also tested all three standard zooms. Those are 16-55mm f2.8, 16-80mm f4, and 18-55mm f2.8-4. My most favorite is 16-55mm f2.8 red badge. It provides about f4 full frame equivalent and 24mm on the wide end. Those things are very important for me and that is why it is my personal choice. It is also very good optically. 16-80mm f4 is a good alternative for those who want more reach and dual stabilization. It is very versatile and suitable for traveling. The price for that versatility is the corner sharpness. It is not great, but in my opinion still perfectly acceptable for this type of lens. Hybrid stabilization in combination with X-T4 works great. It provides maximal claimed efficiency of 6.5 eV. It is indeed very efficient even at 80mm, so Fuji was able to get that right on their first attempt. 18 to 55mm f2.8-4 is kind of a kid lens plus. It provides great size to performance ratio and the stabilization is just as good as with the 16 to 80. Optical performance is actually surprisingly good with this one. It is actually quite a special lens and I will make a full review of this lens soon. To sum up, I can say that I am still very happy with the X-T4. The highlight of this camera for me personally is the synergy between the modern technology and Fujifilm's traditional approach to making analog style cameras. This vintage approach is probably not for everyone. Those who want fully pragmatic package will probably have to wait for XH2. In my opinion, X-T4 has the right amount of Fujifilmness to make it stand out from other mirrorless cameras. The performance of X-T4 is great for both stills and video. It has a very good APS-C sensor, efficient in-body image stabilization, and the best video specs in class. The autofocus is definitely getting better. It is still not on Sony level, but more than sufficient for a majority of situations. I also appreciate that Fujifilm improved automatic exposure in video. There are still some software tweaks that need to be done, especially the zooming smoothness and additional focus areas for video. I also hope that Fujifilm will soon release more lenses fully optimized for the latest cameras. Overall, Fujifilm X-T4 is currently one of my most favorite cameras on the market. It is fun to use and it provides very good results, so I can highly recommend it. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section and see you next time.